In this lesson, we'll learn how we can start to take advantage of some more of the advanced features of Softimage's transformation tools. Okay, so a lot of the options that I want to show you in this particular lesson are going to be found over in the Transform menu, all the way down toward the bottom underneath these Transform tools. Now at the moment, these might be getting cut off just a little bit, so just to free up a little bit more space over here, I'll just come up to my Select menu up here and just right-click up there to basically just collapse everything and bring everything that was down below up to the top. And you can see there's actually a lot of additional buttons that were hidden down below here. So if I were to select my object, just this simple cone object here, you can see that currently a lot of these options are grayed out. Now a lot of these will remain unavailable until we actually select some kind of a transform mode, whether that be scale, rotate, or translate. So let's start with something like the rotate tool, because that'll make some of these other options quite a bit easier to see. So I'll select this cone, switch to my rotate tool, and now I can come in and just quickly rotate this in some direction. That should work just fine. So now you can see that it's actually pointed off in this particular direction. Now if I switch over to my translate tool, you can see that these axis handles actually move along with my object. So again, if I press and hold the C key on my keyboard, swing this around the other way, and then let off, again you can see these different axis handles stay oriented to my object. And that's because currently we are in what's called a local mode, so the axes move with my object. Now if I set this to a global mode, you can see that now the orientation of my object is completely ignored. Now these manipulator handles will always stay oriented to whatever my world axis is set to. So now as I come in, and again, press and hold the C key on my keyboard, swing this object around, let off, you notice my manipulator handles have not changed at all. So actually this does become something that is really useful. So if I need to move my object in a very specific direction straight along one axis, regardless of how that object is actually oriented, I can actually do that very easily using this global mode. Now if I want to switch back to a local mode, just simply click, and now I can move my object back along its local axis again. Now if we wanted to get this object back to its original orientation, we could just go into the rotate and just type in 0, 0, and 0. Alright, and there we go. Now when it comes to working with objects, what we'll probably find at some point in time is that we will actually start to work with objects that may not have their axis perfectly centered up. Now we'll talk about how we can start to move center points in one of our later lessons, but for now we'll look at a very quick and easy way of actually getting around that. So what if I had this object, and again I'll just quickly tap the C key on my keyboard to switch to my rotate tool. You'll see that my object is rotating around this center pivot that is right down here. Now what if I wanted the center to actually be right in the middle of my object? Well, what we can do is access this COG mode, the center of geometry. So if I click this, you can see that my center will now immediately jump to the middle of whatever geometry I have selected. So in this case, now you can see I'm rotating this around the center of my object, or the actual center of this object's volume. Now this is really just a temporary option, so if I turn this COG back off, you can see that my true center is now the one that I'm actually working off of, the center that I've actually set up. And again, we'll learn how we can start to move centers in one of our later lessons. Now in addition to this center of geometry mode, there are also some really neat options to be found inside this reference plane. So for example, again, just for the sake of demonstration, I'll go ahead and take my rotation values and zero those back out. I'll do the same for my translate as well. This will make this a little bit easier to see. Now with this reference, what we can actually do is, instead of having the axes actually oriented along a particular axis or a particular object's orientation, we can actually have an object obey another object's orientation. So let's say, again, if I quickly tap the C key on my keyboard, let's say I have this red cone that's angled over in this direction. Now, when I switch to my move tool, I actually want this torus to move in that exact same direction. So a good way of doing this is to use the reference. So all we have to do is actually right-click, and again, if you remember that any of these little buttons that have this little tick on it, that means that there is some kind of a menu in there that can be expanded. So if we right-click on this reference button, we can choose an object as a reference. And this brings us into a picking session where Softimage basically asks us what is the object that we want to have the orientation linked to. So let's pick this little red cone. And now if you look closely, whenever I select my torus, you can see now its axes are oriented exactly to this red cube, or this red cone. Okay, very, very nice. Now we can actually take this a step further and actually have the reference actually linked to a particular object's components, which we'll talk a little bit more about components in one of our later lessons. But for now, if I were to come in and again just quickly tap my spacebar, let me zero out my rotations. Again, this will make what I'm about to do just a little bit easier to see. So now, again, quickly tap the C key, or really any of the keys on my keyboard. You'll notice that the axis orient still stays based on whatever the setting or the selection that we made previously. So this is still oriented to that cone's previous orientation. Now what I could do instead is, with this being some kind of a polygon object, we could just right-click and let's say maybe we pick an edge as a reference. So now again, Softimage will ask us to choose an edge as a reference, so we can come in here and try to select that. There we are. And now you should see if I were to come in and move this torus right along that x-axis, you can see it's now sliding exactly along the orientation of that edge that we just chose. So lots of really, really powerful options as far as coming in and actually moving our objects within Softimage. Now, we actually don't have to go all the way over to this menu to access these different features. If we were to right-click on our manipulator, we can actually get to these exact same options from this little pop-up menu. So we can very quickly jump back and forth between a local mode, a global mode, a view mode, as well as some kind of a reference mode that we may have chosen previously, as well as being able to get to our center of geometry from this point. Now, as we get a little bit further into our modeling section, you'll really start to see where some of these different tools become very, very useful in some of these different modes. Now, before we wrap up this lesson, there is one last thing that I want to show you, and that is how we can actually come in and disable the default Softimage requirement for us to actually have to hold our keyboard to make an object selection and then let off again. So let's say we wanted to really just make it simple of being able to come in here and select this other torus if we wanted to without pressing and holding our spacebar first. Again, Softimage is very, very flexible as far as letting you work the way that you want. So more often than not, if there is some kind of a setting or an option that you want to modify, chances are that Softimage will allow you to do that. So in this case, to change this particular functionality, we're going to go into the transform menu. So I'm going to left click all the way down toward the bottom. We're going to go down to the transform preferences. We'll click on this, and in this little dialog that opens up, we can choose now what happens whenever we click outside the manipulator. So right now this is set to a simple transform. If we pull this down, we could set this to maybe something like the select tool. So now what we should see, if I were to just move this out of the way, without having to press and hold the spacebar anymore, I can now come in and just quickly select an object without, again, any need to press and hold any additional buttons. But still, the same functionality exists where if we want to now get out of any of these transform tools, just quickly tap the spacebar, and there we are. Now we're still back in a select mode. Okay, so that's a look at some slightly more advanced features for actually being able to come in and reorient and move our objects.